thanks a lot. So I had actually made a humble request not to get into long intros and bios, because you have them available to read. I thought we would just jump right into the panel. Okay, so a big, warm welcome to all of you who made it on this gloomy Monday morning. Okay, and also to those who put their hands up when he asked if, how excited we were for Monday morning and this panel. So I have with me a very esteemed, set of peers who are going to debate an exciting topic. So just to lay the context of the topic, the last financial year has set a record for M&A with deals worth $61.4 billion. Just to let you people know, this was a 5-year high and more than double the value of transactions in the preceding year. So the sharp increase was a result both of strong foreign buying interest as well as consolidation underway across various sectors. Interestingly, inbound deals were $21 billion, domestic deals were $35 billion, and the rest was the start of an exciting outbound journey for a lot of industry leaders here. M&A is the path that businesses take to achieve exponential growth and not just linear growth, and therefore will continue to be an integral part of the Indian economy. The catalyst for M&A is varied, but almost invariably inorganic growth is the top of the agenda. Especially so given the government's efforts to improve the ease of doing M&A. Also, the gestation period for greenfield projects in our country still tend to be pretty long and often rife with compliance with sort of multiple regulations. So for any business, inorganic through M&A is a very, very attractive option. On the global stage, you have concerns about protectionism coming from the US, Brexit in Europe likely to make India a favorable destination for M&A, and sectors directly linked to consumption, financial services, consumer, etc. will tend to see a lot of activity. Small disclaimer, we are a PE fund that loves to invest in consumer and financial services. Okay. There are distinct advantages and disadvantages of both M&A, and to evaluate this and debate on some exciting themes within this topic on whether India is more of a merger versus an acquisition market, we have with us a very distinguished panel comprising of industry veterans from the e-commerce, communications, media, fashion, and technology space. All of these individuals have tremendous experience, personal experience with mergers and acquisitions. So with that, I'm going to start. My first question is to Rahul. Okay, Rahul, Aditya Birla Fashion and Retail has acquisition literally in its DNA, right? In fact, starting out in the early days with the acquisition of Madura, subsequently acquiring Pantaloons, you've grown by acquiring multiple fashion entities. News articles seem to indicate you're in the process of evaluating a merger of your in-house entities, Madura and Pantaloons, within the company. In addition, you've also acquired the Indian business of the brand Forever 21. This is very interesting to me personally because we are a private equity fund that focuses on consumer, and we find many investment opportunities where some of your peers are looking to raise money from private equity firms such as ours for organic growth. You have chosen the M&A route, so I'd love to hear from you as to what you think the benefits of your strategy are versus just raising money and growing organically, Rahul.
So the first thing is that Aditya Birla Group has a huge DNA for acquisition. Actually, the Madura business, which houses some of the most iconic brands in India, like Louis Philippe, Van Heusen and all, was Mr. Birla's first acquisition when he took over as chairman, after the untimely death of his father. So this Madura acquisition from Courts Viela was the first major acquisition that Mr. Kumar Birla personally undertook. After that, there was a long hiatus, and then we took over Pantaloons in the year 2013. Now the issue here was that we were a big all-male, very formal-oriented brand, but we wanted something to do with women's wear for fast fashion, value fashion, and those kind of things. And in 2013, that was the only platform available. So we went across and bought Pantaloons from Mr. Biani. After that, we bought Forever 21. The main thing is that you have to go in for acquisitions is because of the almost impossibility of building a fashion brand or a consumer-oriented brand in a short period of time. Any brand will take minimum 10 years of consistent investment and consistent profitability to become a profitable brand. So it's absolutely impossible to start a new brand. So for us, with Aditya Birla Fashion and Retail, acquisitions is the only way forward. I mean, we cannot launch a new brand and expect it to even start making money in the next 5 to 7 to 10 years. So it's very imperative that we have to acquire. So the other thing about brands is why acquisitions and not a merger is because brands are so distinct and so their identity is so different that we cannot merge design teams, or we cannot merge our back-end sourcing processes across brands, because the Louis Philippe or the Van Heusens are premium brands, their suppliers are premium, they're bigger suppliers, whereas for pantaloons and which is into value fashion, the suppliers tend to be smaller, they tend to be more fragmented. Forever 21 is a totally different, because it's it's designed abroad, it's young women's edgy, fast fashion. So, we do not even have that DNA within us to even design it or something of that sort. So, acquisitions is the way forward for smaller things, like if you were to acquire a brand or something.
Very, very interesting, Rahul. So I'm going to pick up a thread of what you said and direct my question to Tarun, because I find a very, very interesting analogy or rather comparison here. You said, listen, I would much rather buy than build, because to build a brand, it would take at least 10 years to get somewhere, right? And I'm going to move to my next colleague on the panel, Tarun, who's in a very, very fast-paced industry. Okay, so we're talking about 10 years in terms of building a brand, and we're in your industry, Tarun, things get built literally overnight, right? And the pace of disruption is so immense. I mean, as anyone sitting here can vouch for. How many of you use Netflix? And how many of you use Amazon Prime? So a slightly larger number to Amazon Prime. Netflix was introduced about a year ago with 500 rupees a year. Amazon Prime, which I have been hearing from my colleagues over the last few days, I still haven't started, okay, is 500 bucks for the whole year. Sorry, Netflix was 500 bucks a month, Amazon's 500 bucks for the whole year. And now you're looking at Reliance Jio giving unlimited data along with free phones to users to stream shows on their TV. So how many people are doing that just now? It hasn't started yet, but maybe in the next VCCircle, everybody will be doing that. So what are the reasons to make an acquisition in such a fast-paced, dynamic, and disruptive environment, Tarun? So, I'm particularly intrigued because for me, if you make an acquisition for a particular technology, that technology could be obsolete by the time the acquisition is complete. And in this context, could you talk about the preference for mergers over acquisitions, or just?
So it's an interesting thing, Shivani. Media is a very unique industry, and you've got to see it for what it's worth. There isn't really technology as the base to any business. The base to our business is content, right? It was an interesting question that you asked, that how many people will go to Amazon Prime versus Netflix versus going to Jio, right? Yeah. There are very different audience sets that will take all three, and unfortunately, sometimes not even overlap between the three, right? If you are a very dedicated English content consumer, whatever the cost may be, you probably will never downgrade from Netflix to Amazon Prime, right? If you like House of Cards, if you want to watch, some of the top-end stuff on Netflix, you will not downgrade to Amazon Prime. If you are an Amazon Prime Hindi content viewer, then you probably will not go down to Jio, which is linear viewing on a 1,500 rupee phone through data, because that experience will not make you happy. Because you want to watch it by appointment, and you want to watch it when you want to, and on the go and stuff like that, and Jio will be static and at home connected to TV and things like that. So technology is not what people are going after. People are going after content, and the product actually, decides whether you want to go for a merger, an acquisition, or what really your strategy is going to play. Now, to give you an example, somebody like News Corp, right, or somebody like Star in India, they're quite uniquely placed because the OTT platform that they're developing here is far different from what they do in partnership with many other studios in the US with Hulu. And they've taken cricket as their big play into OTT. So they have most of cricket rights, including IPL, for Hotstar. they're taking that content as their route into OTT play rather than, you know, their classic soaps that you know, Star Plus has been doing for several years. And rather than any of the international content that lies on Fox. So really, all of their strategy, whether they want to, you know, acquire some content or whether we want to play something else, drives from content. Same way for Sony. So they acquired 10 Sports because they've decided sports as their mainstay in India as they go forward. And that's their route into both digital as well as their current broadcasting business. So it isn't really technology, it is content and the consumer that you're going after that drives most of M&A in media. I hope I was able to give you.
No, that was terrific, and that's actually a lovely lead-in to my next question for Ananya, because if you just recall, you know, we started the panel with Rahul, who alluded to the fact that some of the acquisitions, I mean, the first sentence that came out of his mouth was design teams, so it was kind of interesting to hear that. And then we moved to Tarun, who talked about technology, but really content being the driving force. Another driving force that we've seen over the last few years is people, right? And so you have many acqui-hires taking place, especially at the e-commerce companies or startup companies. You know, bigger companies end up acquiring a startup for its team primarily. Do you see such a trend going forward within the Indian ecosystem, Ananya? Are there nuances to be aware of when a company acqui-hires another? And is such a route more beneficial than just a simple merger?
So, you know, actually, Shivani, before I go to that, it was very interesting when these two conversations, right? Yes. Because we spoke about brands, and we spoke a bit about technology, and we spoke about content, right? Mm-hmm. And where we are at Myntra and Jabong is actually we're straddling all three. Right. So, interestingly, today when we ask questions around potential acquisitions, we're asking questions around which are the brands, because we can't build all of them, right? And therefore, what are the strategic partnerships, because brands are going to grow. We ask the question around content platforms, and we say which are the content platforms which are going to become big in the country, because fashion is a content consumed. And, you know, our earlier discussion about saying, will Instagram become the way people shop, right? Will Hotstar become the way people shop, or Amazon Prime become the way people shop for fashion? Mm-hmm. And the third is also on the technology side, right? Where we talk about artificial intelligence and therefore acquisitions in that domain. So I think it was quite interesting to hear both the perspectives. Going back to your point on acqui-hire, right? It's quite the buzzword, and you know, we've done about I think 5 of those. Right. It's actually quite simple, right, at the heart of it. I think what tends to happen is 2 things. One is, I think the acqui-hire pace is linked to the evolution of the startup ecosystem. So if you see in Silicon Valley, there's lots of acqui-hires happen because startups they struggle with getting Series A, Series B funding. And then, you know, I've heard terms like soft landing, severance packages for the startup owners, right? And that's therefore a very honorable way for them to wind down because they find a home. The second thing that happens as this evolution is happening is that companies like ours struggle to find the right talent in the right technology domains. And therefore, if there are other startups, like the last one that we did was a company called Inlog, which had developed a technology for supply chain. And that was, the team had technical capabilities that we didn't have internally, and the product was interesting. They were struggling to raise their next round of funding, and that is where an acqui-hire made sense, right? So it can be a true win-win for both the entity and, of course, the, you know, the startup. I do think there are, although, some caveats, right, and things to be careful of, and we learned this in our journey, right? Most of the acqui-hires were successful, but in one of the cases, within 6 months, the founders left, right? And that, I think, was interesting to us because we realized 2 things, which is one, if people are moving from a startup to a quote-unquote corporate, right, you have to really test whether they have thought of what it means, because they shouldn't be just doing it to get an honorable exit and then look for jobs outside, right? And these people went on to Y Combinator, of course, in the US. So I think that is one very important thing, which is now we are much more thoughtful and we really understand what is the motivation of the founders and of the team when they're opting for an acqui-hire. The second thing, which is potentially more tactical, is that we don't give the angel investors an out till a certain time period. So, you know, in an acqui-hire, there are 3 different entities, right? We want to, of course, pay the least money and just get the talent. The talent wants a home, and the angel investors want their money back with some sort of a return. And I think what we realized is balancing all 3 and ensuring that the acqui-hire is successful and contributes to the company needs the incentives to be aligned. So now in our acqui-hires, there is a lock-in period. There is a period where we expect certain outcomes. So I think those are just 2 things which we've learned from our experiences.
That's terrific. I'm gonna just move this slightly to Mitesh. I'm gonna come back to you, Ananya, because you brought up a couple of very, very interesting sub-themes there. So I want to draw on what you said and pull that into the next part of our discussion. But Mitesh, I want you to just add a slightly different flavor to this discussion. I am very fascinated with the fact that fast-growing companies in India are also growing inorganically through acquisitions. I mean, to me, this presents a very interesting dilemma, right? Because they're fast-growing themselves. The shareholders would, you may argue that you could just use the cash to keep on growing organically or growing fast anyway. Whereas for a cash cow company which has healthy cash reserves and not that many opportunities to deploy it, it may seem more obvious if they decide to go in for an acquisition. For a fast-growing company which decides to do it, this must have involved a very, very interesting thought process, discussion, and debate. And I'd love your perspective, Mitesh, because especially given Book My Show recently acquired Burp. I mean, what is your view on the growth strategy that high growth companies could follow to grow inorganically? And what are the kind of things you think about before making such a decision?
Great. I think my co-panelists have almost juiced out the topic, but I'll still try to address this specifically in context of Book My Show. For us, the strategy is slightly different. We follow the acquisition route, but with a thing of merger around it. So the idea is that we need the team. We are at a juncture today in our corporate journey where we have got the customer base. We've got a very healthy, loyal, organic customer base. We've got a great platform. We've got good content, and we are well established, as everyone knows. It's essentially a build versus buy decision, yet we believe that you can't adopt a baby without parents. So we need the founders to be around whenever we acquire a company. These are not very huge companies, whatever we've done 4 or 5 deals in this year. We essentially go with a company which has got excellent product, because that's something which adds to our technological edge and makes our platform richer. So that's the whole idea in acquiring a company. It's very, very essential for us to have the founders also around. And as long as possible, we try and retain the identity of the company acquired also, because it's a mix of cultures at the end of the day. So we've realized it the hard way that it's really difficult to merge 2 entities completely. Rather, you take the benefit out of that, have a strategic angle to it, drive the team in a way where they retain their separate identity, they keep delivering with the same atmosphere, with the same energy, and they add a lot of value to the platform. So that has been our strategy. For example, you mentioned about Burps, great brand value, great top of the mind recall value. The team is great. It's just that they need new vigor and energy, and they need a platform wherein they can have a larger access to.
So if I hear you right, the dilemma is not so much about whether Burp can add in terms of fast growing, anyway fast growing, but perhaps they can add a different perspective, a flavor, or in your case, the brand recall and technology. Is that right?
Absolutely. So Burp is in a, let's say, in a food listing domain, and we are into entertainment. But we definitely see a great synergy over there, because ultimately Book My Show is not anymore only a ticketing site. We are a one-stop entertainment destination where this angle can also add a lot of value to both the entities. And that's what the acquisition has been all about. So we are leveraging their brand value, we are leveraging the experience of the team, and adding on top of it our platform capabilities and our customer base. And I think that will really work out well.
Great.
Sorry, I had one question. So Burp will be listed on Book My Show?
The modalities will be worked out. As I said, we'll try and retain it as a separate customer, as a separate platform also, because it also has a
But
quite
you'll
a huge
also
fan
use
following.
your platform
Correct,
to
correct. So
provide
there will be
them.
cross synergies where you can access it from both the sides. So there will be direction, redirection on both the ends.
That's great. So for the first section of this panel, I wanted to touch upon the rationale for mergers and acquisitions across various industries. So I hope all of you have gotten a flavor for that. I want to end this first section with you, Anubhav, because no discussion is complete, unfortunately, without what the government and the ecosystem that we operate in. As general counsel of one of the Tata entities, you would be very well. What is the government doing in order to make the environment more M&A friendly? Because as you can see from our esteemed peers, people seem hungry, people seem excited about making acquisitions to acquire content, technology, acqui-hires, etc. So what is the government doing here?
I think I think there's several things that come to my mind, starting with the New Companies Act 2013, but I'll just allude on some of them which were more recent. I think the first one then that comes to my mind is the changes they done in the competition CCI approvals. They reduced the time. They took away the time for 30 days, and now there's no more a limitation that you have to do your filings within 30 days. I think that was a very forward-looking move that was announced. More than that, what was also announced just before that was the whole clarification that you need not file CCI approvals if your turnover in India is more than 1,000 crores or you have assets of 350 crores, because it used to lead in multiple filings, and sometimes I think there was a huge expectation from the industry as well that if you're doing an overseas merger, and even if you touch small part of India, that you have to go through that whole process, and it really skewed the timelines around it. So I think both those two moves came out and were taken very, very positively by the industry, and it really streamlined the whole process of mergers and acquisitions. And the other part that comes to my mind is this whole announcement that now Indian companies can go and merge with a foreign company.
Yeah.
And probably we can touch that later, but again, I think the building blocks were kind of laid down in the New Companies Act of 2013. But recently, more in April 2017, the government announced the way forward. Though I think the approach of the government has been a little more cautious in terms of you still require a RBI approval to do it, but I think it's a very welcome way step forward in terms of, but because it does open a lot of avenues for restructuring and different ways you can model the M&A deals. Apart from that, I guess the New Companies Act amendment that was approved last week is touching few issues related to M&A, which is more indirect, but I think it is making things simpler. I think the whole addition of investing company in the definition of the associate company, the definitions of subsidiary companies are being more streamlined to be more friendly with we still have to see these amendments go through. The Lok Sabha has approved it, but I think I'm very hopeful the Rajya Sabha will approve it as well. So I think the government is doing its bit, and the general environment as such is very, very robust and friendly at this point of time.
Perfect. Thanks, Anubhav. So that was the first part of this panel. I want to pick on a couple of interesting things that some of the panelists said during this panel to lay the segue for the next section. Okay. If all of you were listening carefully, there was one running theme which sort of seemed to be coming out with everyone's discussion. Rahul specifically talked about completely different cultures at Louis Philippe, Van Heusen, Forever 21. Ananya gave an example of how in 6 months' time the founders left, and she stressed the importance of founders joining a large company where they may not want to be part of a corporate culture. Working for a small company is a completely different ballgame, right? And then Mitesh added to it saying, hey, when we acquire, we like acquiring parents plus child. So I think this all leads to the very, very fascinating topic of integration. And Ananya, I'm going to start with you. Okay, so because Myntra is a part of Flipkart, it operates as a separate brand under Flipkart. Additionally, there are talks that Jabong, which was recently acquired by Myntra, will be fully integrated with Myntra and pivot to a new business model, that is the B2B domain. So based on your experience, what are the advantages or disadvantages of having an acquired company operate as a separate entity as opposed to being completely integrated into the acquirer?
So, I think that personally for me has been one of the most interesting journeys that I've witnessed, right? I think my big message is actually it's different strokes for different folks. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. Before I was at Myntra, I was at McKinsey and I used to work with financial services clients. And all the acquisitions that I was advising them on were done for efficiency. So one of the first things we used to immediately say is acquisition, shared services, HR, finance, logistics, integrate, and then try and retain the other functions. And that because those were those were done with the business objective of synergy, driving costs down, therefore profitability, therefore cash flows, etc. When I came into this context where when Flipkart had acquired Myntra, it wasn't so much for, synergies, but it was for growth. And that is where, I realized that the approach has to be very distinct, because if you want to be in a market where the market is getting shaped, actually for a few, $100,000, you can end up killing the company and trying to synergize and integrate, which may not be for the long-term benefit. And just to give you, for example, Myntra, the entire HR function completely runs separate from Flipkart. You could say, of course, there could be some synergy in payroll, policies, but the Flipkart group has taken a conscious call to keep that separate, because Myntra as a fashion vertical needs a very different culture. And Flipkart as a horizontal and as a platform needs a very different culture. And I think when we did the same with Jabong, which was an acquisition that we did, the question was, well, Myntra is also a fashion vertical, Jabong is also a fashion vertical, so I'm sure we should do some integration there. Having said that, actually what you were mentioning, Shivani, is not true. We will not make Jabong a B2B entity. Because the interesting thing is, Jabong is a brand which stands for a very different thing in the minds of the consumers. It's more women-oriented, it's more NCR, customer geography, whereas Myntra is more in the south. It stands for edgy fashion, whereas we stand for house of brands. And to continue to retain that different entity and therefore realize the power of the brand and growth, we are actually going to continue to keep the platforms as separate. However, in Jabong's case, of course, on the supply chain side, we've already started integration where our supply chain and logistics is what serves Jabong's demands. But on the front-end side, so for the consumers and for the culture, we'll continue to retain different organizations. And therefore, going back to what I was saying earlier, which is, if the acquisition has been done for synergies and for cost release, it makes a lot of sense to integrate. But if the acquisition has been done to unlock growth, innovation, shape market, and capture new market share, then at least what we've learned is that leaving the entities alone, letting different cultures flourish, is what really unlocks growth, right? And I think you must have seen the same, Rahul, hopefully, with your brands that you were talking about.
That's great. So Tarun, I'd love your perspective also, because Ananya talked about leaving different cultures to flourish independently, going for the greater good of growth. I mean, you see, in fact, the year 2016 was very noteworthy in media for several reasons, right? So it was a year of consolidation through M&A in radio and TV, expansion of video streaming, you were talking about that, disruption by new technologies in the broadcasting space, we mentioned that earlier. So obviously along with consolidation comes integration. And, maybe in other industries, it's one thing to let companies operate with different cultures, because they may not be completely wildly different cultures, right? But at least for the audience here, and from my perspective, when you think about media, read about media, you often think of companies which are completely different, okay? So to have those go about integrating, is it practical to have an acquisition or merger where you allow such completely different cultural entities to coexist? or does it make sense to just say, okay, you know, this is the culture which is going to, you know, dominate, and the other one sort of follows, or does that happen naturally? Love your perspective.
So, you know, lots of things have happened in media which have gone right and gone wrong, right? And I think taking from what Ananya was saying about Myntra and Flipkart and the way they've done it, I think that's probably the best way to do this. There are 3 or 4 areas, you know, in television broadcasting that bring about a lot of cost release, a lot of cost reduction, primarily around external facing, you know, bargaining positions like distribution. So when it comes to TV distribution, you want to be a part of a bouquet, you want to be a part of a network which can actually give you synergies, which can give you cost reductions both on your placement side as well as give you benefits on revenue on the distribution side. But when it comes to the core part of the business, which is content, that's where I think cultures really make a difference. And that's where most organizations should, and I'm not sure whether it does really happen like that, leave the entities for what they were worth and what they bought them for. You know, many years ago we were at Sony and we acquired a sub from Sri Adhikaris, right? And it was a comedy channel. Adhikaris in a very small boutique company had done an excellent job with it. Sony tried putting it within the Sony network and trying to make something of it. And believe you me, it took 7 years for Sony to get sub right, to back to being at the place where they bought Adhikaris from, right? Primarily because they bought it into a culture which was just so different from what you know, a comedy network had to be, and they brought it into a general entertainment piece. They tried doing what they were doing on Sony on sub, blah blah blah, and it you know, they wasted about 7 years doing that. And I think those kind of things don't work in media. You're right. You know, the media culture, the content culture needs to be independent and fairly unique. I think you're going to cover my part of the business in the 3rd section, so I'm going to leave that out on what we are going through ourselves right now. But I think when businesses are of the same nature and there is a certain amount of cost optimization that you can do, you should do it in areas that you can. But what they're worth, which is the content piece, you should leave them independent and almost let them operate like a boutique of their own.
Great, great. So, Mitesh, I'd love your perspective. I think both Ananya and Tarun have talked about the fact that, you know, if you're going for growth, keep cultures independent. He's given us an example where the acquirer wasted 7 years, you know, not understanding that. I'd love your perspective, Mitesh, on a related question. What happens when a merger or acquisition doesn't fit right, okay, in terms of culture? Is it better to cut your losses short, you know, keep trying for 7 years? When would you call it quits?
So I think we need to just step back a little. I think if a merger or acquisition doesn't work right, probably it's your own mistake in terms of going for that particular acquisition. So it's very, very important that before the merger or acquisition, you assess the entity right. And it's all about founders. Again, we typically, I think 9 out of 10 deals will be investing into the founders. And then balance 20% will be, let's say, investing in the product.
But mistakes can happen.
Exactly, right? Exactly. So mistakes then can happen on the both sides, but to avoid that, we set up a process wherein we have a crack team in-house, which actually help the subsidiary or the new acquired entity also to get all the deliverables what they expect from the main entity, and that actually drives them through. Now to come to the stage where actually it's not working out, it's a very subjective question. However, if actually it's bleeding a lot and it's really, you know, turning your bottom line red, it's important to cut the cost and call it quits. But at the same time, I think there are always certain good assets which you can acquire out of the entity again and get them on board. So one particular example is where we had acquired an entity in 2015, and similar situation happened. In spite of trying to salvage everything what we could, it just didn't work out. The business model was not working out. But the founders were great. So ultimately, we shut down the company and got the founders, you know, absorbed within Book My Show fold.
Acqui-hired.
Yeah. So
by default.
It was a forced acqui-hire, as you can say. But yeah, the founders were great, and I think we thought that we could repurpose them to get into our fold, and it's now working out fine.
That's
so
great.
While we have cut down on the losses, but they still keep on adding value. The team still keeps on adding value.
That's
great.
That's great.
That.
Rahul, can you add to that, or add maybe a different flavor to this discussion? How would you analyze synergies when approaching, you know, M&A, and then maybe you can make a distinction between merger versus acquisition.
So
that is our topic.
Synergies, obviously, just like I was in full agreement with Tarun that In a similar case, just like he had content, we have brands. And, beyond a point, you cannot integrate brands. For example, our own brands which are, male-oriented, the Louis Philippe, the Van Heusens, that just you cannot merge the teams which are in this business with Forever 21's team. If you try to do that, it's a recipe for disaster. The other way to always analyze an acquisition well is whether or not you were able to keep the management team which you have brought in from the acquired company, and whether you are able to motivate them and keep them for a long time in your company. That's the only way to guarantee success, and then you can cross-pollinate them between the things. But for the first few years, the success of any acquisition is whether you've been able to keep those teams intact and whether you've been able to grow the business. The financial parameters and all, you can do only up to a point, because, for many of these, so even between pantaloons and where there is a lot of male brands in both sides, the supply chains, the design teams are totally different. When you are designing a formal, very high-end premium shirt, the same team cannot do, something which is very quirky and, you need patches all over the place. And so, it's not the same team. It's the aesthetics are wrong. Everything can go wrong, just like we were talking about in content. So I think it's very, very important that apart from the financial parameters which you will measure in the first 1 or 2 years or 3 years, it's very important that you keep the core value of whatever you bought intact, because that is what you bought it for in the first place. People tend to overlook this aspect of it, because you first buy something and then you try to make it in your own spitting image. I mean, that's absolutely crazy to my mind. Just one point I want to take from Anubhav. I think as far as M&A is concerned, the less the government does, the better it is for all of us. I think, nothing inhibits M&As except government intervention. So I think they should do less and less of M&As.
Thanks, Rahul. Actually, I was going to ask Anubhav to add a different flavor. So Anubhav, you've seen that all our colleagues on this panel come from media, fashion, e-commerce industry. And it's interesting because most of their views are, when you make an acquisition, keep the company separate, keep the culture separate, brands are separate, you can't integrate them. For content, you keep it separate, focus on growth, market share. Now you are the bastion of, the old, conglomerate Tatas, right? And obviously the impression that one has is that when they acquire, it's sort of the Tata way, right? And I can't really see the Tata group saying, hey, we're going to acquire this company, but keep it completely independent, let them run, their way. After all, we're just Tatas. So would you like to add to this discussion on integration and in terms of, how the Tata Group evaluates M&A, what are the advantages of this method, which may be sort of more focused on, complete integration?
Sure, Shivani. I think I'm not qualified to comment on the whole Tata Group strategy because of the whole diversity of the group and the different diverse sectors we are in. But we have done mergers and acquisitions in a lot different ways. Remember, we acquired a company called Glacier Waters, right, and many years ago. And at that point of time, Tata Global Beverages was more of a tea coffee business. And after acquiring, and this company was into vitamin waters, the energy drinks you see so much on the shelves now. It was an acquisition which was made ahead of time. So 10 years ago, I think they decided, no, we still want to stick to the tea coffee business and maximum water. They acquired it, they divested it at a profit, and that company is still doing well under the new owners. And we, on the other hand, have examples of Jaguar and Land Rover. Tata Motors acquired, it has its own set of companies in India. And Jaguar has its own niche market, so two brands in the same market. But I can comment about Tata Technologies. We are into more of B2B business. We do futuristic cars and planes for our customers. So there are like 4 drivers that drive our strategy, and they are very, very strategically driven. One is talent, of course. because there are just so many people who have that kind of talent to do, say, autonomous cars or embedded systems or infotainment systems. And then the other is geographies, entering into new geographies where customer penetration is very difficult in our industry, because it's not like IT that you can do it from anywhere. It requires much more intimacy. You have to be more familiar with the engineers at the site. So it's a different ballgame altogether. And then, of course, the last one is in terms of domain expertise, because that lets you grow. So rather than, so every strategy of integration does depend in terms of what is the main driver behind it. Say, for example, if it is people, one of the key points that we do during a DD is a cultural due diligence, and the report is part and parcel of the entire due diligence, because if the people don't fit, the integration is likely to be a failure apart from the legal financial due diligences that we do. But if it is about delivery, it is about technical expertise, then I think the whole integration process is how quickly we can leverage the technical expertise to get more customers, to get better mining into the existing customer. So it's a different way we do integration in those circumstances. So I can give you many examples, but I think that should be.
Thanks. No, I think that's great. So I think this was a very exciting section of this panel, right? Because we talked about integration and different industries' views in terms of whether to integrate, not to integrate, the people, the cultural diligence that goes in there, and thanks for sharing a lot of personal anecdotes as well. I think Mitesh talked about
one more about integration. So we few years ago, the Birla Group acquired Novelis in Canada, and Novelis is a huge, aluminium firm which has operations in North America, South America, Europe, lots of geographies, and we have Hindalco, which is a huge aluminium company in India, but we've kept the entire operations of Novelis and Hindalco totally separate as far as operations go. But we've only tried to integrate the overall ABG values, culture, all of that over in a slow way towards, trying to inculcate those in Novelis in a very, very slow and measured manner, as well as we are picking up some things from Novelis's culture into the ABG group. So, synergies, all this, all these cultural things are a two-way process. I'm sure Tatas have done something very similar with Jaguar Land Rover and Telco. I don't think they've tried to merge, managements or any of that. So which is the right way to go, in fact, because cost is not the only thing which drives that success.
That's right. So actually that brings me to the third section of this, which is that apart from the metrics that we've been discussing so far, improved efficiencies, increased revenue, growth, market share, etc. Rahul, and I'll continue with you on this, is that what do you think what metrics are often overlooked on whether, judging whether or not an M&A will be successful or unsuccessful, or then, hindsight is always 20/20, but whether it worked or not? Is it just looking at the scorecard and saying, great, we've acquired this new market, or we've, increased our revenue or cut cost, or is there another perspective?
No, as far as synergies, I've already, touched upon it a couple of times. It's very, very, a lead indicator of whether a takeover and an acquisition is going to be successful or not is if your management of the acquired business has been with you, or has it left. This is going to be one of the biggest lead indicators that you will have about the success of the acquired business or not. Unless, there is something which, those guys don't want to just fit into your system. So, you should have analyzed this much before doing the acquisition, whether these guys were going to stay with you or not. So, apart from the regular financial parameters on which we measure an acquisition or a merger, this is something which we have to really keep in mind. But there are certain acquisitions, like I was in my previous company where I was in a telecom tower business. We acquired a huge telecom tower portfolio from Aircel into GTL infrastructure. That business doesn't require any great management depth or something. You just take those towers, get your teams integrated, and nothing is going to happen. Even if the other management leaves, nothing will happen to it. So there are businesses and businesses and businesses. So, and businesses like fashion or media or things like that, management's consistency, brands were very, very important. But there are certain businesses like telecom towers, it just doesn't matter, what your management teams are. So there you have to focus only on hardcore numbers, whether you've really cut down costs, whether you've got the synergies, whether you've been able to, integrate your procurement teams or your, service teams, stuff like that. Very, very simple. And there you look at very hardcore numbers. Whereas, in brands and, high levels, where the differentiation in the business that you have acquired is very high, other things do matter.
Thanks, Rahul. So I think, Ananya, I'd love your perspective, okay? Because you come from a very interesting industry, right? As we were talking earlier outside. I guess the question no longer is whether, people are going to shop online. I mean, I think we've kind of crossed that bridge, right? Having said that, you could argue, just to play devil's advocate, that the jury is still out, whether the consolidation in your industry is beneficial to the companies. I mean, it's certainly beneficial to the consumers because they've gotten great brands, great product at very attractive prices. But is this consolidation beneficial to the companies themselves? And I think to answer that, I'd just like to take this perspective of what are the criteria to judge whether this consolidation is beneficial, and at some level we have to take sort of a forward-looking lens here, right? Because it may not actually be running down the numbers in the P&L right now, but there may be a bigger perspective in mind. So I'd love your thoughts on that.
I think that's a great point, right? And I go back to, all acquisitions or mergers are done with business objectives. So, fundamentally, whether they're successful or not, I do feel is black and white. In the sense, it is when you went in, now whether it's a 3-year time period, 5-year time period, or a 10-year time period, the question is, did you assume it will give you growth? Did it give you that growth? Did you assume it will give you cost synergies? Did it give that to you? And that's fairly hard. And that I do think should be ultimately measured in numbers, right? And actually, interestingly, very few companies go back and review 5 years later what assumptions they made the acquisition on and whether the companies have delivered to those assumptions. So I do think that the final criterion has to be quite hard and outcome oriented. Having said that, I fully agree with what Rahul was saying, that the lead indicators are what is important, right? That's not whether the management stays or not is not the final outcome, but that if the management's leaving, that's not going to help you achieve success of the acquisition, right? Similarly, it's very tempting when people will say, why don't we just merge this particular element of the company, right? And it's every time there'll be one person who will say, well, but what is this really doing for differentiation? And we could save cost. And I think even at that point, going back and asking the question, which is, well, why did we do this acquisition? Did we do this for this particular metric to move? If not, leave it. Don't mess with anything that's not broken. And acquiring companies tend to have hubris. They want to mess with and meddle with everything, right? And say, oh, we know better. But I think don't mess with anything that ain't broken and measure the hard outcomes is, I think, what I would say. Just closing off to your question on whether consolidation is helping companies. I think it again goes back to why are we doing it, right? So this year, Myntra and Jabong together will get to EBITDA 0, which is break even, and fingers crossed it'll be a big milestone for us. We wouldn't have got there if not for Jabong, because it's given us additional growth, which is what we needed, right? So I think in that perspective, yes, consolidation is working for us at this point of time. So yeah, that's at least my view.
So I'll move this to Tarun now, okay? So Rahul and Ananya have both talked about the various criteria that goes in before evaluating whether to acquire or not, right? Be it people, laying out the business objectives, and then validating whether that made sense. And one of the themes which is coming out is, well, if founders leave, then that's a clear indication that it's not working. But it's not sufficient to say that it's working, I guess is my takeaway, right? But Tarun, I would love your perspective. So, Zee's announced an acquisition of Reliance Broadcast Network's radio and TV business. Obviously, you may not be able people to talk about that. But you could shed you could shed light on what are the things that one must keep in mind to be an attractive merger or acquisition target. I mean, here you've had people say, from an acquirer's perspective, this is my checklist, this is how I'm going to check. If you want to be the guy, or the woman getting acquired, what do you do to make yourself more attractive, I guess?
So I'm a founder to this business. I started this business about 11 years ago, literally from my father's computer. And, the Reliance ADAG group also wasn't formed then. It was on the part of their breakup between MDA and ADA, and we didn't have any office and stuff like that. They just invested in these radio licenses, and they brought me on from Sony and said that, why don't you start this company for us? It was quite exciting. It's now about 11 years down, and I've been personally working on this acquisition, so to say, from being acquired for the last 18 months. It is quite tough when you're a founder yourself and you know what you really require to build a company like this, and you have a lot of checklists of your own in your own head, right? Whether will this be the right kind of culture? Will this be the kind of company that this company will be safeguarded within? Whether they will be able to grow it to the next level? And we had a lot of choices, to be honest, Shivani. We had choices between PE funds. We had choices between part PE funds and part staying with our current investor. We had choices between part new founder who could be from a new investor who could be from media and part PE fund. So there were lots of permutation combinations, and I think Z was a natural fit because they really didn't have a radio business, and we were the largest radio network in the country. They also were looking to grow into this side of the business, and they had tried doing this themselves twice over. So Z actually acquired licenses twice over, 15 years ago and 10 years ago, and then didn't launch it. And because it's a spectrum-led business, entry to this business is actually very, very tough, because unless you bid every 5 or 10 years for spectrum, you can't get into the radio business in the country. You can't just launch a radio station tomorrow morning if you so want. And also, this had two parts to the merger. One was the radio business, which was quite unique and had a lot of regulatory issues. The other was the TV business. So Z had a slated position that they wanted to get into the Bhojpuri market, and we had the #1 Bhojpuri channel in the market for the last about 2 or 3 years. And they tried to launch something and had failed even at a network level themselves. And they didn't have a comedy channel, which we did have. So, and we've also gone about doing this merger quite differently. So the TV business goes into Zeal, and that is kind of very differently placed because that has a lot of cost synergies in terms of distribution, technology, and post-production and stuff like that. But the radio business is a boutique business. They don't have anything that really ties in with Z there. There's a certain amount of, synergy in terms of just a little bit of technology and stuff like that we brought in, and trying to get some network advertising contact and advertising sales synergy there. But otherwise, the radio business is kind of independent. It's going to continue to stay independent, and we're going to continue to maintain that culture, that consumer understanding. And really, when both Rahul and Ananya spoke about, how do you go about mergers, I think Rahul had this good, interesting part that there is one which is just infrastructure companies, cement companies, tower companies, where you buy capacity, right? And then you buy consumer understanding, right? And when you buy consumer understanding, then you've got to be very careful that you keep that consumer understanding intact, because what you're really buying is intangible, right? You're buying people's, years and years of working with that consumer and understanding tastes and understanding trends. And that, to me, I don't think can be replicated for a very long period of time. And that's where you really need the core team to stay around with you, or to be able to do some kind of knowledge transfer, So I think that's pretty much
okay, thanks, Darun. Anubhav, I'm going to move it to you. So the discussion in this part has been, both from an acquisition and from a being acquirer and a target perspective, but primarily focused on the domestic market. Okay, and one of the things you talked about earlier, which I'm now coming back to because we are approaching sort of close to the end of the panel, is a very exciting prospect of Indian companies now being able to be merged with foreign companies, which wasn't possible earlier. Okay. And how do you think this bodes for transactions going forward? Do you see a trend of Indian companies merging with foreign counterparts as a means of entering foreign markets, as compared to the previous route of acquisitions?
I think this is a very recent development, and we haven't seen how it is being played out in the market right now. But there are divergent views of this development right now. At one point, while this is kind of being welcomed, that something that was not possible now has been made possible. But if you get into the details of the whole announcement, I think the government has taken a very cautious approach in moving towards it, because not only you have to kind of take approval of the RBI, but also the jurisdictional NCLT that is governing, plus also the approvals of the regulatory bodies, if any, in the foreign jurisdiction, apart from the normal in-house procedures and things like that. And plus you cannot do this with every country. I think there's a necessity that these countries are part of where RBI has signed treaties with respect to financial controls, and there are enough money laundering provisions in those countries or laws in those countries. So it's not a carte blanche kind of stuff that has been given by, it's a cautious approach but a welcome one. The views which the industry, what we hear is saying is basically it does enable lot of intra and intergroup company transactions. Probably the Indian businesses can kind of restructure their businesses to create more value, maybe some IP restructurings, but still I think that notification was not very clear on whether demergers are allowed or not of the Indian businesses. It was like whole-to-whole kind of merger that was announced. So kind of it's a mixed thing. But there is also one third view that came to my in one of the discussions, which is basically more than the Indian companies benefiting from it, it will be the foreign companies who will benefit, because they will have they'll use this venue to gobble up the Indian assets. So I think it's anybody's guess at this point of time how it plays out, but we don't see many of these stuff right now in the market, and over a period of time, probably we will see the full benefit of this announcement.
So I think still early days. Mitesh, as we are coming, to the close of this panel, I'd love your perspective. We've had a very healthy discussion and debate as to what are the criteria that one looks for when making an acquisition. What happens when an acquisition, fails? How does one integrate? Do you keep the entities, as culturally disparate entities, or do you completely merge them? What are the benefits of each? What are the business metrics? How do you take a hard look at assumptions, etc.? So I think given the context of this discussion debate so far, what is your view on why a company may merge rather than acquire a target? I mean, that is the topic for this panel, by the way.
So I'll answer this with two very interesting yet diverse examples. First was when I was with Ola and we acquired Taxi for Sure. Now the rationale for investment was practically nothing. We had the entire customer base, we had the
Very
same vendor
honest,
base,
I must
we had
say.
and I think now since this is public, so I maybe I can be honest here. We had a superior platform, so everything was there. And the reason for acquiring Taxi for Sure was just to have a competitive edge, where you don't want your competitor to acquire them and get established in the Indian market. So that was a very, very different and diverse example of an M&A, where the deliverable, we all were searching for an answer that how do we justify to the board that we want to acquire this. But in hindsight, it really added a lot of value. And we practically wanted nothing, not of a single member from the team. But that really helped the cause a lot. Second is where it was more of a windfall with my Book My Show stint, is where Book My Show was originally invested into by Network 18 in 2007. And eventually Network 18 got acquired by Reliance. So that was like a windfall for us, where we were not a party to this merger or acquisition. But with Reliance patronage right now, we really have a very, very bright future with their endeavor and their foray into Geo and all the other allied things. So I think it's only very subjective, But yes, interesting developments, and I think you need to take a call based on the situation. I mean, some of my best M&A decisions where we haven't done any decision and we haven't
That's super.
we haven't
That's
invested.
fantastic.
So I think that's where I close it.
fantastic. Thanks, Mitesh. So we are now towards the end of the panel. So instead of just doing a summary, which I've been doing for you sort of throughout the panel, I'm going to end on a slightly high energy and surprise note for my panelists here. Okay, so I'm going to enter a rapid fire round. Please don't, the idea of you not deliberating and thinking through this is exactly that. Just say the first thing that comes into your mind. You get 10 seconds for it, and then I'm going to literally move on to the next person. Okay. So the first question on the rapid fire is, and I'll start with you, Tarun. Name one successful M&A deal in India and one unsuccessful one, according to you.
So, I think the Sony sub one was very unsuccessful.
Okay.
Clearly, and I think the Radio City Jagran one is fairly successful.
Okay, Anubhav.
I give a pass to this.
Pass. Okay. Okay. Mitesh.
So successful deals too, Flipkart, Myntra obviously,
Yeah.
and Ola Taxi for sure. Unsuccessful, you're going to get killed me for this. Snapdeal, free charge.
Okay. Ananya.
Actually, Flipkart, Myntra, and Snapdeal.
Snapdeal. Okay. Okay. Rahul.
Yeah, so a successful one is the one between Madura and Pantaloons, where we did this acquisition.
Yeah.
Is now turning out to be quite successful.
Okay.
The unsuccessful one, sorry, but Tata and Chorus disaster.
Okay. 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 Fine. Tarun,
why I
back to you.
gave a
What is
pass
the
to
top metric that you would use to evaluate a merger or acquisition? A, ROI. B, increase market share. C, cost synergies. Or D, other.
So I think increased market share would be a big one for
Anubhav?
me.
All of the above.
All of them. Okay.
Increase in market share which result in better ROI through cost reduction.
Ananya.
No, I already said different strokes for different folks.
Okay.
So I think at different
Rahul?
points, very different things.
Absolutely. It's all of what you said plus a lot of what you haven't said. So yeah.
Okay. The next one is, in your opinion, what would be the best way for a startup to enter a new domain? Okay. And here, I don't want an all of the above answer, please. You actually have to pick one. Okay. So A, acquisition, B, merger, 3, acqui-hire, and D, just raise more funds. Tarun?
Acquisition.
Okay. Anubhav?
Merger.
Raise more funds.
Raise more funds, it helps you do all.
Great.
Yeah, raise more funds. and,
Fantastic.
yeah.
That bodes very well for the moderator towards the end of the panel. So everybody's leaning towards private equity at the end of the M&A panel. And what do you foresee as the trend in transactions to be going forward for the Indian landscape of companies? A, more acquisitions, B, more mergers, or C, 50-50?
50-50.
50-50.
More acquisitions.
More acquisitions.
Yeah, it'll be more acquisitions because depends. I mean, you can't merge everything that you buy. Yeah.
Okay. And the last question, what according to you is the single most criteria that a company should seriously evaluate before acquiring another company? Tarun. Just one thing. The most important.
Consumer understanding.
Consumer understanding. Anubhav?
Customers.
Customer.
Their own cash position. I think a lot
Nice.
of time
Nice
where companies
answer.
have done the deal
Yeah,
just for the
very
sake
nice
of doing it
answer.
without actually putting
Yeah.
in a lot of thought.
Ananya?
Yeah, integrity.
Okay.
No, it's management evaluation.
Super. Okay. So that was a very exciting panel, at least for me. Okay. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. I think with that, we can close this panel. Thank you all. And thanks to the audience.
Thank you so much. Thanks.